Hi, everyone, and welcome to Signature West Podcast. I'm your host, Sam West from Palm Springs, California. My guest today is Erica Fladeland, and she's a trans, and she's here to share with us the process of how it all started and where she is now. Hi, Erica.
Hello,
How are you? Good
I'm
morning.
good. How are you doing?
Good. So, you are originally from North Dakota,
Yes, grew up in a really small town and had to get out of there eventually in my early adulthood.
and you went to California, or was that later on?
In my mid 20s, yeah, I did clown school in my mid 20s, and then shortly thereafter moved to Los Angeles for a number of years.
And
And
then in
then
2013 is where it sort of all started. You felt the need, or you felt I don't want to call it urge, but you felt there's something that needs to be done. What was that like?
yeah, so I was a couple of years sober. I was living in LA. I was just driving to work at like 6 a.m. and the thought just popped across my head as quietly and just normal as could be. I'm transgender. Just like,
Out of
what?
nowhere.
Um, Kind of. I mean, in hindsight, it all makes sense, but yeah, out of it literally was just like out of nowhere. And I literally just thought to myself, my next thought was, oh God, I need to get back into therapy and
But
start
it
talking
was
about
never
this.
brought up in therapy before. You've never thought, let me play with this. This is maybe something I want to consider. It was none of that. It was just you were driving to work one day
It,
and
there's a lot like as a teenager, I struggled with what I now understand to be gender dysphoria growing up, but I didn't have words for it. I didn't know really anything about being transgender. There wasn't a lot of media out there talking about it. So mostly it was, I didn't have words. And when I moved to LA, I made some transgender friends. I started learning about their experiences. And so eventually I finally had the language that my brain just finally like revealed to me that I
right.
was trans.
And then what happened next?
Yeah, so then I got myself into therapy. Um, we talked about it for a couple of years. I started experimenting with gender presentation, just like doing little androgynous things like, painting my nails or, throwing in maybe a more feminine piece of clothing in my masculine clothing, stuff like that, buying makeup, playing around in makeup, it was all at that point very like alone in my room type
Right.
experimentation. Some of it, like I might go out and do stuff. I told a few friends, a close friends that I was going through this. Um, but actually, at the end of therapy, my therapist, who was not actually trained in like gender issues specifically,
Hmm.
kind of was like, "I don't think you're trans. I think you just maybe like to cross dress." So I like didn't do anything about it for a few more years. I moved to Minneapolis. I became friends with a transgender theater company. And I just remember hanging out with them before a rehearsal one day for a project and looking at all these different trans folks around me and being like, you know what? I have community now. And like, I feel like I can do this. So I'm gonna transition. So I came out to them and then started,
So did you, was it, I mean, leaving California to go to Minneapolis, they're very different states of mind.
yeah.
What was California might have been an easier choice
I actually think
in hindsight?
Minneapolis particularly is a very transgender friendly community.
Is it
There's a
really?
lot of resources here. Is actually Minneapolis and St. Paul were one of the first actual cities to pass transgender protections.
I did not know that.
Yeah, on a city level. Even I think before San Francisco did. San Francisco was one of the first ones, and I think Minneapolis, St. Paul did it first.
So it's safe to say that you felt safer, ironically enough, in a place like Minneapolis as opposed to California.
Yeah, I think I just had a very different community when I was living in LA, and it was a very wonderful community. And the people I did tell were very supportive of me. Um, I just don't think I was really ready yet. Because by then I was still in my late 20s, and I look at it now when I started to transition in my mid 30s that I just have a lot more tools to get by with. I've done a lot more therapy. I just know myself way better that all of the things that are difficult about transitioning, I was just able to meet those challenges in a much more grounded way.
So now 2 years into it, it would be 2015, um, but you really didn't start till 2018.
Hmm.
So when that process, when you want to start, what did the mindset, now obviously 2 years of therapy and changing states and more of a community, and
Hmm.
now you decided, okay, I'm going to do this.
Yeah, luckily, Minneapolis has a clinic here, an LGBT clinic called Family Tree, and they make it very simple. Like you go in for an appointment, you tell the doctor like what your plans are, and they have every resource
Wow.
imaginable to you, whether it's other therapists or anything like that. And they're an informed consent, which for those of you who don't know, like basically some places still require you to get like a psychology evaluation, a psychiatry evaluation, all these other things. But if an informed consent model basically means they read you all the good, the bad, and the ugly about possibly transitioning, and understanding that you're in a sane state of
Right.
and mind. Um, they're like, "Are you still okay with beginning this treatment?" And you're like, "Yep." And then they can just begin right away. Then.
And how long did that take from the beginning to sort of
Yeah,
ending?
it took the hardest part was actually getting the first appointment because they're so there's such a need, and they only have so many spots, so many doctors and resources available. So the longest part was just waiting for the appointment. But once I got the appointment, which was actually about exactly 3 years ago, I got in there. I had my initial consult with my doctor, and then they did some blood work. And when that blood work came back a week later, January 25th of 2018 is when I was able to start hormone treatment.
So that's when it started in 18.
Hmm.
Um, you mentioned that your friends in when you first thought about it were very supportive. How
Hmm.
about family members?
Yeah, I've been very fortunate with family members. Certainly, my immediate family, like when I came out to them, were very supportive. They don't understand every aspect of it, but they've tried their best. It took some time with names and pronouns, understandably, to like change their mindset. But they've been doing their best, and they've grown a lot in 3 years.
You're very
Um,
fortunate,
yeah, I've been very fortunate. There may be like more distant family that may have different opinions. I don't know,
right?
but I don't care
Right.
at this point. So
Um, so if you would name one thing that we would say was the hardest thing, what would it be? Clearly, it's not the ridicule of family and friends. So
yeah,
what would it be?
um, the hardest part was when I started going out as Erica into the world. Um, I just My relationship to society changed drastically when suddenly, I'd be wearing women's clothing and putting on some makeup and going out into the world. I remember going on a shopping trip with a friend, and just suddenly I was being stared at by particularly cis, presumably straight men, in ways that felt very uncomfortable. I remember walking down the street in downtown St. Paul, and like a group of drunk men came out of a bar and started threatening my life. Um, and the world became a very scary place very fast in just a matter of a couple months, where something as simple as going to the bathroom became like an anxiety producing event for me.
Especially the last 4 years, the last 4+ years.
Yeah, yeah, I transitioned during this,
Right,
we can now say previous administration,
right, right, right,
thank
right,
goodness.
right.
Not an easy time to transition. I lost a lot of rights in 4 years.
What in hindsight, again, would you say it would have been less discriminatory, which I doubt it. A place like in California, which you left to go to Minnesota,
Um, I have some transgender friends who live like in California, in LA, in like very what you would assume liberal,
and they're not any
accepting
better off.
places. Yeah, and they still get it. They still get threats. They still get people staring. They get people saying terrible things to them. So it's unfortunate that, even when you assume someplace is safe, you still got to kind of keep your guard up a little bit.
And how's it now? does it still feel like you're
Uh,
walking on eggshells when you're walking by a bar? There's straight guys walking out, or
yeah, I I would say that I've adjusted my life for maximum safety. I don't really go out alone like I used to. Like before transitioning, I would take myself out on a date out to a restaurant just by myself, once a week at least. And now I don't do that. And now we live in a pandemic where it's even like more difficult, right?
right,
But
right,
I just try not to be alone very much. Like I have no problem when I'm out with friends, especially if I'm like in a group of trans friends. Like I feel 100% safe, but yeah, doing things alone is probably the biggest challenge. um but you know again, and you make certain strategies, like make sure your bladder is empty before you go out so that hopefully you don't
wow,
have to use a bathroom, and just like little things like that that a lot of people take for granted, like things that I now think about.
interesting.
Yeah,
Um, what did this process teach you?
it taught me that I have a lot of this process taught me that I'm a lot stronger than I think I gave myself credit for. Um, it taught me how much more difficult the the world is for people of a marginalized identity. I always tell cis men this now, that however bad you think women have it in this world, it's like multiply that by 100. However, like, if you already believe that their lives are more difficult by being women, make it even more difficult. And I can't speak to other identities that I don't have as much, but I still can like definitely um, understand, how different identities have a lot more difficult times in this world. Even when they have a very positive experience, me as a trans woman, my experience is just that much more um, full of anxiety than it ever was. I used to be able to, when I lived in LA, just go outside my apartment and walk for hours around the neighborhood, even the areas that were like less safe, perhaps. And I generally felt fine. And I would like never do that today.
But
Um,
that was in LA. That was before you began the process, so it's not really fair to compare if you live
yeah,
in LA now,
yeah.
right?
So yeah, if I lived in LA now, I don't think I'd go for those long walks by myself
You still wouldn't do it.
in some neighborhoods. I mean, maybe I would,
Well,
but
you really don't know because you haven't really done it, so it's hard to say what you haven't experienced it. So it would be unfair of you to say, unfair of me to ever ask because you haven't done it.
well, like I do go for walks alone here in Minneapolis. I live close to some parks and I go for walks in those parks alone. But I also live in a neighborhood that is very like LGBT friendly. Like every house on my street has a pride flag, has a trans flag, has all the supporting you know s- paraphernalia outside their houses that make me feel like I'm in a pretty safe place.
If you would look up, if you would want to, I don't want to say the word idolize or I guess the word is look up to in the trans
Mhm.
world, who would that person be?
Gosh, I really look up with a lot of admiration towards Sylvia Rivera. This one of the original like trans activists
Right?
in the civil rights movement. Um, Her life and times, I just also resonate as like a sober person to her struggles with substances and all this type of stuff. So that's one, and then another person who, because her books and stuff were so instrumental in the beginning of my transition, Kate Bornstein, who's a
When
trans
did you
author.
first learn about Sylvia? Like, was it before you thought about the process, or was it during? When did you even
Uh,
become
I
aware of
learned
Sylvia?
I learned a little bit about Sylvia from my trans community that I had in LA before I transitioned. They certainly taught me a lot about about like trans civil rights and the history of a little bit.
So
And then
this was. Go ahead.
when I started to transition, one of my friends who's a transgender man, gave me a book, That's Revolting, A Queer Guide to Avoiding Assimilation, that like had a lot more sort of like the political stuff around the issues around transness. And in just doing a lot more research that way early on in my actual, when I was physically transitioning, um, you know, I began to become more and more aware of Sylvia, Marsha P. Johnson, and some of like, not just Stonewall riots, but like the Compton cafeteria riots in San Francisco in the 60s. And just like, I just started learning more about the history of everything to do with the transgender, like civil rights movement.
So pre that right to work morning, when you had the thought into your head, did you know who Sylvia was or any of these people were before that?
Uh, wh- Before I had that thought in my head, I knew who Sylvia Rivera was very superficially. Like I knew she existed from some of my trans friends at that time. I did
But you
not
knew who she
know.
was. But you knew who she was. You know what this,
Yeah,
a little bit of the
but
story behind her.
before I made those transgender friends in LA, I had no idea. I'd never heard of her. You know, the first 20 some years of my life.
No, but I mean, but I guess I'm trying to, I always look at things like when did I first, when was my first thought I was attracted to men? So
Right.
I didn't know what gay was, but I remember, God, he looks attractive. So without even knowing, without even deciding to, I'm gonna come out. So before you
Mhm.
had the thought that driving that one morning driver to work, did you even know who Sylvia Story is or was, or who is this person? And oh, how did they get there? Did that ever was that ever in your thought process, or even in your knowledge of who these people are?
Just a tiny bit by that point. When I started to actually physically transition years later, that's when I started to really dive deeper into who Sylvia was and like actually learn
More
more
about
information.
who they are.
Yeah.
Was that comforting?
Uh yes and no. In some ways it's really depressing to see the ways in which the fight back then in the late 60s and early 70s for the trans community um hasn't grown in some ways over decades. And then it is really inspiring to see this trans woman who, you know, got up on stage in front of an entire pride ceremony and like spoke her truth in front of thousands of people who were angry at her. And like I find it really inspiring, even though it was like it took a huge toll on her to do what she did. um and then yeah, there are some things in there that I can point to and be like, you know, things are better than when she hopped on that stage, which was real nice. um
Well, you must have
but then
known.
there's
You must
oh,
have
go ahead.
known that when the process, when you decide to go ahead to do the process, you must have known it's going to be extremely difficult or
Yeah.
extremely per se. I mean, I know you're very fortunate with friends and family, which you did not know that pre, because for all you knew, they could have been the other way around. But you were very fortunate in that department. But you must have known that
Mhm.
this is going to be a long stairway to climb. Or did you think not? It wasn't going to be. It was going to be an easy, happy clappy. It's going to be easy, and the world will have to adjust.
Yeah, definitely.
Definitely.
No, I knew it was going to be difficult. I knew, but I feel like I've just been so fortunate. Even my work, the job that I had at the time, I came out to my manager and she helped me like communicate with HR and make for a very, very smooth transition to being recognized as Erica at that job at the time. Um, there's just the entire. It's like strangers that are the hard part. It's the people I don't know that are the hard part, and I knew it would be that way, but it's one thing to know and another to actually experience.
Right. So if you now want to give, I don't want to say advice, but if you want to, like, let's say, mentor somebody that's want to go through this, what would you tell her?
Yeah, I always tell people, regardless of their situation, whether it's transitioning or any other life problem, is like the number one thing is to find community, find other people who are going through what you want to go through, and like
Before or during or after? Obviously after for sure, but
all of
before.
the above. Yeah, find other people who aren't going, like find enough people on the entire range of the experience. Find people who've been transitioned for decades, find people who have been transitioned for a few years, find people who are brand new to transitioning or just thinking about transitioning. Make friends with all of them. You're going to need the people who are,
Create a camp, basically.
yeah, yeah,
Create a vessel of as much as you can fill it up, because you're going to need them. Which
absolutely.
I guess that would make sense in any kind of coming out feeling.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah, you need the people who are like right there, the same place you are, and you need the people who have just experienced it in the last few years, and then you need those people with like decades of experience who has seen it all and can tell you like, that's a bad idea, honey. Maybe you should
Do,
rethink your inks on that one.
have like in life, like in any community, not everybody knows everything, and
Hmm.
everybody wants to be Mr. No, Mrs. or Mr. Know It All.
Hmm.
And so obviously you say, well, God, I should have listened to that person. Oh my God, why did I even listen to her? Why did I even listen to him? You
Hmm.
know, because obviously you're going to create the community, and now you're going to take advice, pick or choose. Have you had the experience where say, God, I should not have listened to her? This was not a good
Um,
idea.
you know, I don't think so actually. I feel like um I learned because I'm also an actor performer, which is like one of the reasons I moved to LA years ago in the first place. But through, that constant, whether through acting training and the rigorousness of like doing shows with the director, you begin to learn how to like filter out things, at least for myself, of like when I receive advice, I want to listen to it, I want to take it all in, but then I need some processing time to really like sit alone with those thoughts and be like, what is important to me and how does this advice or direction fit into that, and learning to like cut away the stuff that maybe doesn't apply to you in your situation or like doesn't resonate in you.
Right.
So I'm pretty willing, if advice doesn't feel right to me, to just go ahead and like disregard. They say thank you, be gracious that someone gave you their opinion on it, and then do what you were
Do
going to
what you
do.
do.
Yeah.
What do you
um
see for yourself in the future? Like, what do you want to see this become for you personally, and then for the whole?
yeah, for me, it's always important to me in many aspects of my life and who I am to be sort of like a beacon, a light that people who may be thinking about this or are going through this can like look to and approach to find community. Something I always love in networking is like bringing people together who need to be together. So, um, you know, as a content creator online, making content or whatever, I just want to be someplace where people can like recognize me, come to me, feel a sense of solidarity with whatever they're going through, find others who may be able to have some solidarity with them, and just be like, yeah, be that lightning rod that brings people together is really like my end goal.
In the trans community, you're talking about just for that vessel of the trans world.
I mean, definitely, that's definitely in there. But again, I'm like a sober human. If people are like struggling with sobriety or like substance abuse, I always make it known that they can come to me. I've had lots of friends over the years like DM me out of nowhere after maybe a year or two of not talking, being like, "Hey, I'm really struggling. I think I need to think about my relationship to alcohol or whatever. What do I need to do?" And I can give
But
my
your sobriety was 2 years prior to this. It wasn't part of. It wasn't really. It's always part of,
yeah.
but it wasn't the cause of
I think had I not been sober, I wouldn't have heard that quiet little voice in the back of my head say I'm trans.
driving in the car in the morning.
Yeah. Yeah. I wouldn't have even been in that car. I wouldn't have even been in that situation to begin with.
Right.
I'd be miserable somewhere, not able to like really listen to what's going on inside.
And that
Cause
was 2 years in between.
yeah, yeah. I moved to LA after about a year of sobriety, and then I moved to LA, and yeah, I actually worked.
It's interesting that you moved to LA after you became sober. Usually it's the other way around. Usually
Right.
people go to LA to binge out, and then they'll discover sobriety, because LA is not exactly the easiest place to live.
Yeah, if I had not been sober going to LA, I probably wouldn't be alive right now, honestly. I'm grateful for the order of operations of my life, how it
Right.
happened. Yeah.
And where do you see this as a whole? I mean, obviously, before you decided to do it, it was a very different world.
Hmm.
And the last 4 years, it became a different world. And who knows what's going to become in the next world? Where do
Yeah.
you want to see it become?
I still have sort of like transition goals, whether that's like physical stuff or whatever that I love to have happen. And again, I do a lot of content creation where, you know, I hope to find ways to incorporate my acting clown training that I've had over the years and my community building skills I've had over the years and my everything about production management that I've learned over the years. Like I'm looking for all this stuff to just bring it all together so that like I can do something that I love in life and hopefully be a really good influence for those behind me who are still finding themselves and looking for someone to inspire them. If someone's looking for their Sylvia Rivera, I'm not Sylvia Rivera, but if someone's looking for
Right.
any type of person
But
just as a guiding post, I hope to be
right.
that person.
But where do you see the whole community? Where do you want to
Oh,
see it in the future?
yeah, I mean, we've got a lot of work cut out for us to repair the last
Don't
four
we all?
years.
Don't we all?
There's a lot to be done.
Yeah.
So we can't give up the fight. I'm hoping to see more trans representation in Congress and maybe even, God forbid, someday a presidency. We've made a lot of work on state levels. There's a lot of state legislation where there are trans representatives. And, hopefully just get more on a national level, global level, just you hope to almost get to a point where we're normalized, where we're not like ooh, this person is trans. Like,
Well, you know the story. I'm not sure if you watched the documentary. It was an Outfest last 2, 3 years ago, and I forget her name. And now she actually just got into office. She actually got married.
mm,
I forget her name, but it was a great documentary. They featured 4 different cases. Um, that was very enlightening. I
mm,
learned a lot just from watching that film, and now I just saw her being elected. So yeah,
that's
good to her.
great.
Yep,
Yeah,
yep,
definitely. Just more of that. And yeah, like I remember growing up in the 90s, talk show hosts having transgender guests on, they call them like transvestites or whatever. And
right,
they were just seen as like freak shows and
right,
like, oh my God, these are so strange. What are these
right,
things on stage? It's just like real gross to like watch that footage nowadays.
right,
So I'm
right,
hoping we get to a point where just like a trans person comes on, or even like have us in movies, more like just a trans person being a trans person in a movie, and like it's not a big deal that they're trans, but they're just there and can be the comedic star, can be the drama star, just do all these things that anybody can do.
right, right.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Erica, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for being here. The best of luck to you and everybody else out there that's going through any process really. I mean, it's all life journey.
Hmm.
Whether it's going through a trans or even coming out, um, it's not an easy process. But I
Hmm.
do admire you, and I do thank you for doing this.
Yeah, thank you for
Um,
having me.
Everybody else, we'll see you next week and to a new episode. Thank you again for watching. Take care, everyone.